In the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Welcome to Path to Yaqeen, where hearts find clarity, minds seek truth, and souls journey toward certainty. Discover Islam through knowledge, wisdom, and purpose. Subscribe, share, and walk with us on the Path to Yaqeen.
Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through fascinating sources, pull out those golden nuggets, and help you get well-informed fast. Today, we're diving deep, really deep, into the nature of God's attributes, drawing on some, well, quite incredible Islamic theological material. Our mission. It's really about uncovering the core principles for understanding these attributes, and crucially, spotting the common mistakes, the pitfalls that lead people astray. It's not just about facts, is it? It's about clarity, precision. You're getting those aha moments.
Absolutely. It's fundamentally about recognizing the creator's uniqueness, avoiding that very human habit of projecting our own limited reality onto something boundless. So yeah, we'll look at what the attributes are, but just as importantly, how we know about them, and maybe most critically, what to avoid when thinking about them. It's really a path to more accurate knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack that core idea first. The nature of God's attributes is completely distinct from anything in creation. It's not a simple mapping, right?
Not at all. Far from it. In fact, what we might see as a perfection for us as created beings can actually represent a deficiency when applied to the creator.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about eating or drinking. For humans, that signifies health, right? It's a good thing, a perfection.
Right, sustenance.
But for God, needing to eat or drink would imply dependency, need, and that's a deficiency. Same with sleep, essential for us, but a defect for the all-aware, ever-watchful creator.
That's a fascinating flip. So I guess, does it work the other way too? Can something we see as a flaw in humans be a perfection for God?
Precisely. Take pride, or maybe better put, greatness. For humans, arrogance, thinking too much of ourselves, that's a serious defect.
Definitely.
But for the creator, greatness, al-kibriya, majesty, al-azama, these aren't flaws, they're perfections. They signify his absolute, uncontested dominion and control. The sources are very clear on this. God actually warns against anyone trying to compete with him in his greatness or majesty. So yeah, it cuts both ways. Not every human perfection is a divine one, and not every human deficiency is a divine one either.
This really seems to underscore God's absolute transcendence.
Yeah.
Is that concept, Tandy, underlying all of this?
You've hit the nail on the head, yes. The core principle is Tanzi, God's absolute transcendence, and, well, his incomparability.
Yeah.
It means he's completely free from any limitations, needs, or resemblances we find in creation. Not just about what he has, but what he isn't. He's beyond our concepts, really.
Okay.
Understanding that first is key. It sets the stage before we even list the attributes.
Right. That sets the foundation. So with that transcendence in mind, how do we even come to know about these attributes? The source material points heavily towards the Prophet Muhammad, doesn't it?
It does. He's the conduit. The way God's attributes were conveyed to humanity primarily came through him, and the sources identify three main ways this happened.
Okay, 3 ways. Let's break those down. What are they?
Certainly. So the most frequent method was by sayings, qawl. This is where the prophet just, verbally described God.
Like direct statements.
Exactly. The example given is a supplication, "Our Lord, Allah, who is in the heavens, sanctified is your name." Things like that. And there are many, many examples of these verbal descriptions.
Okay, makes sense. What's the second way?
Less common, but still very important, were descriptions by actions. Sometimes the prophet's physical actions indicated something about God.
Actions. How so?
Well, one example is from the farewell pilgrimage. When he asked the companions if he'd deliver the message, he'd raise his finger towards the sky, then point it back to the people.
Gesturing upwards.
Right. Testifying to God's elevation. Another one is raising his hands high when praying for rain again. His action affirmed God's highness, not just words.
Interesting. So sayings, actions, what's the third?
The rarest was by approval or concurrence. Iqrar. This happened when someone else described God and the prophet explicitly or implicitly approved it.
So he confirmed someone else's understanding.
Yes. The sources give 2 quite striking examples. First, a slave girl was asked, "Where is Allah?" She answered, "In the heavens."
And the prophet?
He approved. He said, "Emancipate her," confirming her correct belief.
Wow. Okay. And the second example?
A Jewish scholar came and described God holding the heavens on one finger, the earth on another, the mountains on another, and so on. A description of immense power and scale.
And how did the prophet react to that?
The text says he laughed, sort of in confirmation and appreciation of this description. So his laughter was the approval, the iqar.
Sayings, actions, approval. Got it. So why is accepting these descriptions coming through the prophet in these ways so fundamental? What makes his conveyance the benchmark?
Well, it boils down to his unique qualifications. The material points out 4 key qualities that make his descriptions absolutely authoritative and therefore binding on us.
Okay, what are those qualities?
First, he was the most knowledgeable of God. Simply put, no human knew God better. Second, he was the most sincere advisor to humanity. His intention was purely for our guidance.
Sincere and knowledgeable. What else?
Third, he was the most truthful. What he said was purely truth, no falsehood. And fourth, he was the most eloquent. He could express these profound realities with perfect clarity.
Knowledge, sincerity, truthfulness, eloquence.
Exactly. Those 4 together mean that what he told us about God is the truth, it's precise, and we have to accept it as it came.
Okay, so accepting the prophet's descriptions is non-negotiable. Now, this is where it gets really practical, right? The sources lay out 4 major pitfalls, 4 errors we absolutely must avoid when dealing with these descriptions, like guardrails for our understanding.
Precisely. These are the big 4 don'ts. To properly understand God's attributes, you have to steer clear of distortion, tahrif, negation, tamtheel, inquiring into modality, takyeef, and assimilation, tamtheel.
All right, let's take them one by one. First up, distortion, tahrif. What does that look like in practice?
Tahrif is basically changing the apparent meaning of the words used to describe God's attributes in the texts, twisting the meaning. Now, often people who do this call it ta'wil, interpretation, maybe to make it sound more academic or acceptable.
Right. Interpretation sounds neutral.
But the source material argues, no, tahrif distortion is the better, more accurate word for blameworthy changes.
And why is tahrif preferred? You mentioned a few reasons.
Yeah, 3 main ones. First, the Quran itself uses the word tahrif when talking about people altering revealed meanings. So it's scripturally grounded terminology.
Okay.
Second, tahrif just sounds more negative, more off-putting, which is fitting because this is something blameworthy we're talking about. Ta'wil can sometimes be neutral.
Ah, so the negative connotation is intentional.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that leads to the third point. Not all ta'wil is bad. The word itself has different meanings.
Okay, like what?
Well, ta'wil can just mean explanation, like a scholar explaining a verse. That's fine. It can also mean the outcome or fulfillment of something, like when a prophecy comes true, that's its ta'wil. Or, crucially, it can mean diverting a word from its obvious meaning if you have strong proof for doing so.
Okay, so there's acceptable interpretation.
Yes. But the blameworthy kind, the one that's actually tahrif, is when you divert the meaning without any valid proof, just based on maybe philosophical ideas or wanting to avoid what seems problematic.
Can you give an example of that kind of distortion?
Sure. The classic example is God's istawa ala al-arsh, his establishment on the throne. Some interpret this as meaning he gained control over the throne.
Okay.
But the source argues that changing established himself to gain control without solid textual evidence is tahrif. It's changing the direct meaning of the words revealed. It's altering the message.
I see. Changing the text intended meaning without justification. That's clear. So if distortion is twisting the meaning, what about the next one, negation or ta'til? How is that different?
Ta'til is denial. It's disavowing or negating God's names or attributes, either partially or completely.
So not twisting the meaning, but just rejecting it.
Basically, yes. The difference can be subtle. Think of it like this. Tahrif messes with the words of the evidence. Ta'til denies the intended reality that the evidence points to.
Okay. Could you maybe illustrate that with the hand attribute again?
Sure. If someone says God's 2 hands actually means his 2 powers or 2 blessings, that's tahrif. They've changed the meaning of hands.
Right, distortion.
And they're also doing ta'til because they've denied the attribute of hands as it was intended. They've negated that specific attribute.
Okay, so that's both.
But consider someone else who says, okay, the text mentions hands, but I have no idea what that means for God. I can't comprehend it, so I'll just affirm the word but leave the meaning entirely to God.
Ah, so they aren't reinterpreting it.
Correct. They aren't distorting the word hand. They're not committing tahrif, but they are negating or suspending the apparent meaning of the attribute. So they fall into ta'til denial of the intended meaning, even if out of claimed caution.
That leads into something the sources strongly critique, right?
Yeah.
This idea of tafweed, just entrusting the meaning to God without understanding it.
Exactly. The sources are very critical of attributing this kind of meaning tafweed to the early Muslims, the Salaf. The view that they just read the words without grasping any meaning is called out as either, well, ignorant or potentially dishonest.
Why is that view considered so damaging?
Because it leads to some major problems. 3 big ones are mentioned. First, it makes the Quran seem unclear, maybe even like whittles, when God himself calls it a clear explanation.
Undermines clarity.
Second, it implies the Prophet Muhammad himself didn't know the meanings of the attributes he was teaching, which is a huge criticism of him, given his role and qualities we just discussed.
Right, it makes him just a mouthpiece, not a teacher.
Precisely. And third, if the original intended meanings are supposedly unknown, it opens the floodgates for anyone to claim any interpretation they want. Heretics, agnostics, no one could refute them because, hey, who knows what it really means, right?
That's a powerful argument. It creates a vacuum.
It does, and that's why this popular saying you sometimes hear, the way of the Salaf, early Muslims, is safer. But the way of the Khalaf, later scholars who engaged in more interpretation, is more knowledgeable and wiser. The sources say that's just false.
False. How so?
Because true safety, true knowledge, and true wisdom can't be separated like that. They go together. One famous scholar, Al-Razi, who delved deep into philosophy, apparently admitted later in life that purely rational methods often just lead to confusion about God. He concluded the Quranic method is best, affirm the attributes clearly stated, but without likening them to creation, we'll get to that, and deny any deficiencies, but without negating the affirmed attributes. That's the sound path.
So the takeaway isn't just that Tafwid is wrong, but that claiming ignorance about the meaning actually undermines the Quran's clarity and the Prophet's teaching authority. Okay. That leads us to the third pitfall. Takyeef, or inquiring into the how. What's wrong with asking how?
Takyeef is trying to figure out or describe the modality, the specific how-ness of God's attributes. How does God see? How did he establish himself on the throne? How does his hand function? Asking how.
And that's forbidden. Why?
Yes, it's prohibited, based on both scripture and reason. Textually, the Quran warns against speaking about God without knowledge. Do not pursue that of which you have no knowledge.
Okay, and rationally.
Rationally think. How do we know the how of anything? 3 ways, right? Either we see it directly or we see something identical to it we can compare it to, or someone truthful who has seen it tells us exactly how it is.
Right. Observation, comparison, or reliable testimony.
Exactly. And none of those apply to the modality of God's attributes. We haven't seen God. There's nothing identical to him to compare him to. And the reliable testimony of the Revelation tells us that he has attributes, but not how they operate or exist in their essence.
So just to be clear, it's not that the attributes don't have a how. They must exist in some way. It's that we are incapable of knowing that how.
Precisely. That's a crucial distinction. They have a reality, a modality that befits God's majesty, but it's beyond our finite human comprehension. And this is perfectly captured in that famous story about Imam Malik. Someone asked him, the most merciful established himself on the throne. How did he establish himself?
Yes, I've heard this one. How did he respond?
His response became legendary. He said, essentially, the establishment, istawa, is known, we know its meaning in language. The modality, how, is inconceivable, we can't grasp it. Believing in it is obligatory, and asking about it, the how, is an innovation, bid'ah.
An innovation? That's strong.
Yes, and he reportedly had the questioner removed. Why an innovation? Because the Prophet's companions, the people most eager for knowledge and closest to the revelation, never asked how. They accepted the attributes, understood the meaning, and didn't delve into the ungraspable modality.
So asking how implies what? That God should have told us if it were necessary.
Kind of. It implies questioning the wisdom of the revelation, or assuming we could grasp it if only it were explained. The correct approach is to affirm the meaning derived from the text, believe in it, and stop at the boundary of the how.
Affirm the meaning, reject probing the how. Got it. That seems like it would naturally lead us away from comparing God to creation, which is the fourth pitfall, tamtheel. This feels like a really common trap.
It is. Tamtheel means assimilation or comparison, directly likening God to his creation.
So saying God's hand is like a human hand, or his hearing is like our hearing.
Exactly that. It's actually a specific type of takyeef, isn't it? Because if you say God's hand is like a human hand, you've automatically assigned it a modality, a human one.
Ah, right. Every comparison implies a how.
Though not every attempt to define a how takyeef is necessarily a direct comparison, tamtheel, but tamtheel is explicitly forbidden.
What's the evidence against it?
Both scriptural and rational again. Scripturally, the Quran is emphatic. There is nothing like him, laysa kamithlihi. Do you know of any like him? And there is none comparable unto him. Clear verses. It also warns, do not set up rivals or comparisons to Allah, and do not coin similitudes for Allah. The prohibition is strong.
And the rational arguments, they seem pretty intuitive.
They are. The basic difference between the creator and the created is vast. God's existence is necessary, eternal. Ours is contingent, temporary. Think about attributes we share in name only, like hearing. God hears everything, everywhere, simultaneously. Our hearing is incredibly limited. How can they be alike in reality? Plus, even within creation, things with the same name are different. A human hand and an elephant's trunk both grasp, but they aren't alike if there's such difference among creatures.
How much greater must the difference be between creature and creator?
Infinitely greater. And even our innate disposition, our fitra, tells us the creator must be fundamentally different, greater, unique.
Okay, that's clear.
Yeah.
But what about those texts that sound like comparisons? You hear them quoted sometimes, like the hadith about seeing God in the hereafter as you see the full moon, or the one about God creating Adam in his image. How do those fit with nothing is like him?
That's a really important question. And the first principle here is authentic revelation doesn't contradict itself. If we think we see a contradiction, the issue is likely with our understanding, not the texts.
So we need to reconcile them carefully.
Yes. We refer the ambiguous back to the clear and foundational principle. There's nothing like him. Now, for the hadith, you will see your Lord as you see the full moon. The comparison, the as, represented by the letter kaf in Arabic, isn't likening God to the moon.
It's not. What is it comparing that?
It's comparing the act or the clarity of seeing.
Yeah.
Just as you see the full moon clearly, without doubt, without obstruction, without having to crowd together to get a glimpse.
I see.
That's how clearly believers will see God in the hereafter. The comparison is about the vision, not the one being seen.
Okay, that makes sense. What about Adam being created in his image? That sounds very direct.
That one has a couple of solid interpretations that avoid tamtheel. One is that it doesn't mean Adam physically resembles God. Think about another hadith where the first group entering paradise are on the form of the moon.
They won't literally look like the moon.
Right, it means they'll be radiant, beautiful, luminous like the moon. Similarly, Adam being created in his image could mean he was created in the best, most perfect, most beautiful form suited for him. Another interpretation focuses on the phrase, his image. Just like we say, house of God, Kaaba, or she-camel of God, or spirit of God, adding his denotes honor and special creation. So his image means an image specially created and honored by God. Adam's form was uniquely and wonderfully made by God.
So interpretations exist that maintain God's transcendence.
Exactly. And one final point on terminology. The sources often prefer using the word tamtheel, assimilation, rather than tashbih, likening.
Why is that?
Mostly because the Quran itself uses mithal, like similar, in its negations. Laysa kamithlihi shay. Also, historically, some groups started accusing anyone who simply affirmed attributes like hands or eyes of doing tashbih. This confusion led some to deny the attributes altogether to avoid the accusation. Using tamtheel focuses specifically on the incorrect act of saying God is like creation, avoiding that confusion.
Wow. Okay. That was incredibly detailed, a real deep dive. We've covered the unique nature of divine attributes, the absolute transcendence, how the prophet conveyed them, and these four crucial pitfalls: distortion, negation, asking how, and assimilation.
It's a comprehensive framework, isn't it? And it's so vital for anyone wanting a clear, faithful understanding. It really pushes for intellectual honesty combined with deep humility, recognizing where our understanding has to stop.
Right. It acknowledges the limits of our human minds when facing the divine. It really shows that understanding God isn't about forcing him into our limited concepts.
No, it's about listening carefully to the revelation, accepting what's clearly stated, affirming the meanings, and rigorously avoiding these specific intellectual errors.
So for you listening, what this deep dive really highlights is that true knowledge here isn't just collecting facts. It's about the discipline of thought, knowing what to affirm, how to approach it, and crucially, knowing what you can't know and being okay with that, maybe even finding awe in that mystery.
Beautifully put. It really is a testament to the guidance provided. So maybe the question to leave you with is this: how could applying this kind of discipline, careful language, rigorous thought, acknowledging limits, how might that change how you approach other complex ideas or profound questions in your own life?